figure out how much meth we could smuggle with this.
Yo, Mr. White, we got the new delivery plane ready, man. Oh, Lord!
You've probably seen some of Flight Test's massive builds, but that's a team of countless experienced builders that have been doing this for years. Now, what you haven't seen is what happens when 6 morons get together and try and build a full-scale size RC plane without legit plans in 24 hours. The team was set to arrive 7 a.m. Monday to begin the build. Only Ben and Ian showed up at 9 a.m. Since it was just the two of them, they started off by designing the gear while they waited for everyone else to wake up. The plan was to use 3/4 PVC pipe to build the main structure of the gear. Then, they'd cut out some foam wheels. Although you'd think the foam wheels would have been a dumb idea, this really was the only option without spending hundreds of dollars or adding 50 pounds of weight just from the wheels alone. To add some strength to the wheels, the boys doubled up the 2-inch pink insulation foam and glued them together. Somehow, they rolled. Once they did all that they could with the gear without having a fuselage, Julian decided to show up to the field and got to drawing the shape of the fuselage. The first half of the fuselage was 8 feet long and almost 4 feet high. Once it was all sketched out, Ben started cutting up the foam. Misha showed up just in time to film while the boys began mocking up the left half of the fuselage. Bungees were also added to the PVC gear to add suspension. It wasn't until this point that the boys began to realize the sheer size of the project they were embarking on.
I can't believe this. Dude, we can fly in this shit, bro.
Thankfully, Highland got off work from Boeing and showed up to start tackling arguably one of the hardest parts of the project, the wings. His plan was to use 2 16-foot pieces of wood as the spars, then 4 sheets of 8-foot long and 1-inch thick insulation foam. Highland and Ian quickly got to work while Ben and Julian began cutting out the second half of the fuselage. Once Ian and Highland got the wing all laid out, they realized that the wing wasn't going to be as thick as they wanted. To save weight, they cut out a second spar to go on top of the wood spar. Meanwhile, Ben and Julian began cutting everything out, and it was time to start gluing the first and second half of the left fuselage together. They started by using hot glue to hold the 2 pieces together, and then Ben cut out some pieces of foam to help reinforce the area. He didn't feel like this was enough though, so he also mixed some 15-minute epoxy up to reinforce the section, along with some fiberglass. By now, Ian and Highland had the wings all laid out and got ready to hot glue the spar onto the wings. They then glued the foam spar on top of the wood spar to increase the thickness of the wing. Ben and Julian reached a stopping point, so they walked over to discuss the plan for the wing box that would be put in the fuselage. The wing box would act as the main structural point, holding both the wings to the plane and serving as the main gear attachment point. Obviously, the boys wanted it strong, so they used 2 pieces of plywood spaced a couple inches apart. The wing spars would join in between the 2 pieces at the top, and then, at the bottom of the box, the gear would join. This would also keep the 2 fuselage pieces together. To save weight, they cut triangles out of the wing box and made an X shape. While Julian got to cutting, Ian and Highland were back to making progress on the wing. Sort of.
Well, that sounded horrible. What was that?
Oh, wow.
I can see the line.
There. Yeah, dude.
Highland has used this building technique before and had success with it, but obviously 1/4-inch foam is a little easier to bend than 1/2-inch. Then they decided to do what they should have done from the start, which was to cut bevels along the length of the wing to make it easier to fold, only they didn't cut enough. And as you can guess, this is where things started to fall apart. Since the clock was ticking and $500 worth of foam was already invested, Highland decided to redneck the repair job. He used Gorilla Tape to run along the length of the bevel where it broke. But then they tried folding the wing over again, and it broke. Again, and again, and again. With the sun setting, the team started to realize that this may take 2 days of building before she was ready to fly, if at all.
We got the aeroplane.
It's not gonna fly, cause it's
Wings on straight, and we gonna make it to the bottom, cause we all gonna crash, and we all gonna burn.
After the boys got to work again, they concluded the day by finishing folding one wing half and giving the wing its first flight.
That was great.
Oh, that's so fun.
All that foam.
Let's go, baby. All right.
It's so heavy.
The boys got a late start to the day with, what do you know, only 2 team members. Ben and Julian got everything out and began working on joining the 2 fuselage pieces together. Ian then showed up and began working by making hubs for the wheels so they'd spin freely over the PVC pipe. He inserted a piece of basswood on each side of the wheels. Once he wrapped up the wheels, he was on to working on the other wing. Ben and Julian were working away on the wing box and got the front half mounted to the right side of the fuselage. The team then mocked up the fuselage around the wing box to make sure that the foam would bend enough to join the foam at the tail of the plane. Finally, something that went right. With morales high, Ben and Julian realized they needed to cut the rudder off the fuselage because it was going to be way too thick otherwise. But that part's for later. Back to Ian. He was ready to fold over his half of the wing. Once completed, he realized a problem. He made 2 left wings.
Oh yeah.
Rip. He tore the doubled wing apart and moved the spar to the other side so the 2 wing halves would be able to join in the wing box. Speaking of the wing box, the fuse was almost all joined up. Ben and Julian just needed to join the tail of the aircraft together. Once completed, Brian, our awesome mentor, showed up with pizza to raise the boys' morales once again. With their stomachs full, Ian and Julian mocked up the gear one more time with the brace that was designed to go just under the gear of the wing to add extra support to it. They then did the other half and tried attaching it to the plane to get an idea of if the gear would work or not. Obviously the brace wasn't long enough, but that's nothing another trip to Home Depot couldn't fix. Ian grabbed half of the wing and put it on the fuselage so the boys could get some more motivation to keep building. But as morale reached a peak, disaster struck.
Hurricane. Yo, watch the plane, it might fly away. Oh Lord! I got all of that. That's our elevator.
Yeah, there goes our elevator.
Why is it flying so well though? Holy it's catching thermals.
Yeah, we're not getting that.
The team took a couple-hour break and ran to Home Depot to wrap up the rear bracing for the gear. The original idea was to join the brace together in the middle, but the boys ended up deciding on another method, but more on that later. They decided to wrap up the day with some easier tasks. After that, Ben and Julian cut the rear bracing to length so the gear could be mounted to the plane the next day. The boys then called it a night and planned on a Maiden the following day.
Jesse, we need to build. Nay, Mr. White, we don't gotta build. We got enough dough for the rest of our lives, yo. Jesse, listen to me, this is important. We have to finish this build. Skylar is gonna f***ing kill me.
After the Breaking Bad impressions were over, Brian joined the boys at the field and made the horizontal stab and control surface for the plane since the old one flew away. He used Gorilla Tape to hinge the control surface to the stab. While he wrapped up the finishing touches on it, Ben and Julian got to work on figuring out how to mount the horizontal stab to the plane. They decided on stabbing some wooden dowels through the fuselage after dousing them with glue. This turned out to work really well. Ben took a quick break to clean out his car before he sold it later that day and prepped for his New Hampshire move, as Julian got to work on the rudder. While the glue was drying, Ben and Julian started to add PVC cement to the landing gear to hold it firmly in place. This stuff does an amazing job of keeping all of it together. Highland got off work around this time and showed up to start working on mounting the motors to the plane. The original idea was to take them off Mudgy 133's center section and mount them to the wing, but based on the structural problems the boys were already having with the plane and lack of time, they decided to cut as much weight out of the center section as they could and jam it into the front of the plane. It was now time to bring the plane out so they could begin mounting the motors and getting a rough idea of where the CG was going to be. And guess what? This is where the boys started to have a feeling that the plane was going to be pretty tail heavy. For the time being though, they just wanted to continue building and figure out the CG later. Julian continued working on the rudder and secured it on the horizontal stab using the same method he used earlier. Meanwhile, Highland wrapped up chopping up the wing to a plane he spent almost a year of his life building and set it up next to the plane to start marking where they should cut the foam to make room for the motors. Now, if you remember back from day one, the wing had some torsion issues, but believe it or not, there was an easy fix to this problem. Big brain time. By simply adding wingtip cover fairings, they fixed their torsion problems entirely. However, as they were rolling the plane earlier, the team discovered that one of the hubs for the wheels had cracked and that it was no longer usable. They'd later replace this with a plywood hub that would hold up against stress a lot better. Highland showed up and started working on the ailerons. Within an hour, he had both wings done and ready to be put on the plane. As the sun was setting, the team realized that a Maiden wouldn't happen that day, so they decided to just do an easy task and start removing some of the weight that they could by cutting holes in the fuselage.
No! Where's the no!
What?
Where's the hot glue?
Yeah, well, I think we're out.
I swear I have enough hot glue, guys. Don't even worry about it. I have 30 sticks. Don't worry about it.
Oh.
The boys started by mounting the wings of the plane. They quickly discovered that Highland's original plan of using metal struts would be too heavy, and that the wing box alone wouldn't support the weight of the plane. They had to improve World War I style. The boys tried building a 1.5 foot high tower to run paracord through to each wingtip to support the wings against negative Gs. And then they realized that they'd also need some support going underneath as well, so Josh worked on that. He even did the math, and it turns out that the wings with paracord supports should be able to withstand at least 1.5 Gs, both positive and negative. No snaps allowed. Most of the morning was spent twiddling their thumbs and decorating the plane with a foam pilot and spray paint.
Smiley face.
Smiley face, okay.
So here we go. We're going to start with just the mouth.
So much better than the right way.
That's a pretty good mouth. Now we're going to go for eyes.
What does that say? Flat.
And now you have to get the circle so that it knows it's aerodynamic.
No.
Ben would like it to be noted that he didn't want any of this done, but the reason the boys were procrastinating was because there was a big problem. The center of gravity was way off. Josh calculated that without any modifications to the existing airframe, it would take almost 26 pounds in the current nose to fix the problem. Instead, the boys worked smarter instead of harder. They elected to send Ben home to rip the motor off his OG Stoll plane, while Julian ran to get a long piece of wood from Home Depot. The idea? Instead of adding a lot of weight to the existing nose, they'd add less weight further out. Plus, the team was already getting concerned about having enough thrust for this thing to take off. They were committed at this point, though. Once Ben arrived, the motor mount was on and Highland was busy working on getting rid of the sway in the mount, again, with World War I building techniques. While he was working on this, Ben discovered another problem. The hot sun was beginning to make the Gorilla Tape peel off the wing, so Josh grabbed the roll and went over all the control surfaces to rehinge them. He also extended the elevator on the plane because Ben had concerns about it not being quite large enough. Finally, the build was just about complete. The boys started off by doing a control check with the motors unpowered, close enough for government work. After solving those minor problems, the team was ready to carry her out to the field for the first flight.
Exactly. 54.999.
Yeah. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go! Holy shit.
The plane briefly achieved flight, but obviously didn't have enough power to make it much further than that. However, 4 days of their lives had been spent on this thing, so they decided to give it another shot. Contrary to most armchair engineers' theories at the field that day, the gear looked like it was ruined, but it rebounded right back in place. The team dragged the plane back into position, and Highland had the idea to run while holding the plane up from the rear for ease of launch. They got unlucky though, and the frontmost motor burned out its ESC on the first flight and wasn't producing any power. With both the ESC and the boys burned out, they took a brief break and came up with the plan to have Ben run home and grab a new ESC while Josh cut as much weight off the plane as possible. This included getting rid of the gear for hand launch and cutting as many holes in the foam as possible without sacrificing structural integrity. With the sun setting, it was time to conclude the final day with a hand launch.
So this will be the second flight. I've pretty much already given up on this working, but I don't know. We cut a bunch of weight out. We fried the old ESC. We put a new one in. I really don't think this is gonna work, but we'll give it another shot. I just really want to go home, honestly. Oh!
Unfortunately, Ben's prediction was correct. The boys had an amazing time building this flying contraption, but even they admit that the limited flight that it had was definitely a buzzkill. Have no fear though, we will be retrying this beast with properly matched power plants here in New Hampshire in the not so distant future, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and happy landings, and bounce one on for us. We'll see you next time with a new upload.
4 days of my life gone in 30 seconds.